We're here tonight to talk about sensitive issues, and we're trying to make it not so sensitive anymore. Let me say thank you very much for coming. I know it's a long day, but you being here means a lot to us. Let me also thank Judge Lejeune. Thank you for being here. And also our friend, Senator Abeler, and everyone else who's here. I think most of you maybe have seen the flyer that we sent, or the event we sent. We're talking about female genital cutting. We don't want to use mutilation because mutilation is really awful word. We're talking about functioning, and I'm going to say the vagina word. There's nothing to be scared about. What we're up against is really we're talking about respecting women and girls' rights. And we want to start 200 million women and girls who have been already cut for not their fault to not to be called mutilated. Mutilation really makes it look, part of our body is very awful. It makes us look terrible, and it creates really sadness and increases trauma. When your colleagues are thinking you've been mutilated, and especially the Western culture, it creates disgust, and it creates almost like you're carrying something awful in your body, and that's not showing respect for women and girls who have been cut. Also, what I want to say is we're really sick and tired of defending ourselves and saying people are saying this is about Sharia law, this is about men doing it, Muslim men doing it. We agree on one thing. This practice has been created to produce women's sexuality. It's a fact. But it has nothing to do with Islam, nor Christianity, nor anyone else. This is like old tradition that came from the pharaohs, the old Egypt. And it still is spreading the world. Out of all the countries that FGC or female genital cutting is practiced, we know that 85% of them are Christian practiced, and there are less than 20% that are actually Muslim practiced. But this has been pushed as an Islam thingy, and it doesn't really create any conversation of helping African and Asian women, especially in East Africa women, where 1 in 9 women die in labor. And also due to the female genital cutting, poverty, and everything else. Making it taboo and less empowered by women and girls, it removes the conversation from the realities that exist on women's rights and reproductive health rights. With that, there was a legislative bill that was passed so fast this session that we didn't even know what to do. But thank God, at least the Senate side, there were people who hit the brake and listened to us, like my friends Senator Abeler, Senator Housley, and Senator Leamer. Without them, I think we would not be here today. We'd be in a crisis mode. To that, what we're going to do is Judge Lejeune, who is a dear friend of African community, people of color, she's also a judge and understands what rules are. She's going to dissect this bill for us tonight and see the danger that was really passed so fast that we want to talk about it. It's a problem, but it's not our problem. It's not a religion problem. And with that, I want to make sure that it's really uncomfortable to talk about FGC, especially the Western, non-Africans, non-Somalis, non-Asians. But we have to talk about it. We're here, we're your colleagues, our kids are playing your colleagues, we will be working together. If you're a healthcare provider or a psychologist, you'll be seeing us around. We are not going to hide that anymore, and we want to prevent it, but how do we prevent it if you're really oppressing the very people who should be empowered to stop it? With that, I want to welcome Judge Lejeune, who one of her latest work is that she goes to Africa, Europe, and everywhere. And the last fight that she had fought for FGC was actually when a legislation bill was passed, and I think it was in Sweden, where every young girl's private part they said we have to take a picture when they're going to Africa, and when they come back in, they match that private genitalia picture to the young girl. That's like how radical people have tried to look at communities such as our community. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Judge Lejeune. Thank you.
Thank you, Fartun, for convening this session and for all of your work, your leadership in the community. I think all of you know that in a democratic society, you have to be able to follow legislation through the legislature, be able to give your input, and be able to either support or object to various pieces of legislation. If you are a daycare provider, a social worker, a teacher, a doctor, a person in the medical profession, a counselor, you'll be having a conversation about female genital cutting because mandatory reporters are the people I just talked about. And so I'm going to take you through the bill step by step so that you can see the plain language of the legislation. And first of all, we start with the overview. And the overview gives the objectives of what they want to do with the bill. First, they want to create a new felony offense for a parent or a guardian who knowingly allows a female cutting of a child, or who facilitates the temporary or permanent removal of the child from the home, and it requires the Commissioner of Health to provide education, outreach to communities, allows the county to continue a child protection case without providing reasonable efforts to reunify the family, adds the crime of female genital cutting to the list of actions that can constitute the basis of a CHIPS, and that's a child protection petition, and to the list of crimes that constitute egregious harm. Creates a new felony offense for one who performs type 4 female genital cutting on a minor. Clarifies that a peace officer can take custody of a child if there is reasonable belief that the parent is attempting to or has allowed female cutting of a child. Creates a tiered penalty for a person who performs female genital cutting, or parents or guardians who have knowingly allowed the female cutting. Now let's go to section 1. The additional requirement is added that the Commissioner of Health's duty to provide education and outreach to communities that practice female genital cutting. Now, this requirement stands by itself. You notice there is no staff appropriated, no funding appropriated, so it's what we call an unfunded mandate. It directs the Commissioner of Health to do a certain thing, but does not provide any money for a statewide obligation as intensive as educating the thousands and thousands of families that may be impacted from Senegal to Somalia in terms of where they come from in their original communities. The purpose is to educate these communities about changes in the bill, include laws that allow parents to lose custody for allowing female genital cutting. And Section 2 provides a duty to ensure placement, prevention, and family reunification reasonable efforts. And it allows for the county to continue with a child protection case without providing reasonable efforts to reunify the child with the parent. So that means that if there's a phone call, the police grab the children, the case goes to court, the parents go to court, and there is no presumption that you're going to have visitation, that you're going to be able to communicate, that you're going to have a parental plan to get your children back. It says without providing reasonable efforts to reunify the child with the parent. When the parent has been convicted of allowing female genital cutting. So The criminal justice system is going one direction, the child protection system is moving in its own direction, and if the person ends up with a guilty plea, then the child protection case continues to move along without any opportunity, or at least any presumption, that the parent should get the children back. Section 3, child in need of protection or services, adds the crime of female genital cutting to the list of actions that can constitute the basis for a CHIPS petition. And Section 4 adds a new definition called egregious harm. Adds the crime of female genital mutilation by a parent to a child for the list of crimes that constitute an egregious harm. The implication: committing egregious harm is a ground upon which the county can base a petition for the termination of parental rights. Under such circumstances, the county can request and the court can order that the county does not have to provide reasonable efforts to reunify the child with the parent. And so you are talking about a loss of custody. Now, Section 5, crime, creates a felony offense for any parent, guardian, or other person legally responsible for the care or custody of a child who allows a female genital cutting of a child. Creates a felony offense for a person who performs a harmful procedure of the female genitalia of a minor for a non-medical purpose, and does not constitute a clitorectomy, excision, or infibulation. And Section 6 clarifies Chapter 609 that a parent who has attempted or allowed for the genital cutting of a child has committed an act that allows the child to be immediately removed from the parent's care. And this is what I was saying earlier, that your child under this provision would be immediately removed from the parent's care. What does that mean? It means that if you have income to support paying your rent and your food based on the number of children that are living with you, and those children are removed, then that income stops. Your food, your housing that's tied to that stops. Now, Section 7 is the penalties section, and that creates a new set of tiered felony penalties for a person who performs or allows female genital cutting to take place based on the World Health Organization's description or the 4 levels of cutting. Now, level 1, the most severe, now under this legislation would have a penalty of up to 20 years imprisonment or a payment of fine of $30,000 or both. Tier 2, a penalty up to 10 years imprisonment and a fine of not more than $20,000 or both. And penalty 3, up to 5 years imprisonment, payment of a fine of not more than $10,000 or both. And 4, up to 5 years imprisonment, payment of a fine of not more than $10,000 or both. Now, penalty level 1, if the act results in narrowing of the vaginal orifice with the creation of a covering seal by cutting and appositioning the labia minora, labia majora, or both, the penalty is up to 20 years imprisonment and a payment of a fine of $30,000 or both. If the act results in partial or total removal of the clitoris and the labia minora, penalty up to 10 years imprisonment and a fine of not more than $20,000 or both. And level 3, if the act results in partial or total removal of the clitoris, the prepuce, or both, penalty up to 5 years imprisonment and a fine of not more than $10,000 or both. And level 4, that is a harmful procedure, no definition provided, to the female genitalia, not described in the first 3 clauses, and the penalty is up to 5 years imprisonment, payment of a fine, not more than $10,000 or both. And Section 8 definitions, maltreatment under the Child Protection Statute includes neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or mental injury. And Section 9 is persons mandated to report and persons voluntarily reporting. Section 9 requires a person who is a mandatory reporter to report to the appropriate agency when the person has reason to believe a child is a victim of maltreatment or was a victim of maltreatment in the preceding 3 years. Now, the preceding 3 years is what we call an ex post facto law. It means this law is proposed to be passed in 2018, but they want to relate the offenses back 3 years to 2015. So you would, under the Constitution of the United States, states are not allowed to pass laws that relate to past behavior that was not prohibited when the law was passed. So there's a concern in terms of mandating to go back 3 years. So you can imagine what the doctor's visit would be like if all of a sudden a doctor is required to get a 3-year history on a child and try to interrogate a child about their activities or any surgeries or anything happening in the last 3 years. It creates quite a bit of confusion for the child and isn't relating to medical treatment. I think one of the things that I wanted to point out to you, and then we'll go on to Senator Abeler and then have our Q&A, is that there is under the U.S. Constitution something called freedom of movement, but this particular bill seeks to look at that freedom of movement as possibly a preparation to commit a felony. So more definition and precision is required. Merely somebody planning to take a vacation shouldn't have to defend themselves under this proposed legislation. There's freedom of association under our Constitution, and a right to travel cannot be restricted without due process. That's what our Supreme Court has held. So it's very important that just the mere fact that somebody's planning to take a trip should not be the basis for the authorities coming and taking away the children. And as Fartun said, when we were in, when Nadifa Osman and I were in Oslo, the Oslo medical authorities were planning to go to every Somali home, photograph the vaginal area of every girl, and keep the photos on file so if the girls went anywhere and had a procedure, they would be able to have the documentation. And what I told them when they talked about the plan is I said, our people have already been through that. That's what we went through in the slave market, people inspecting us and looking at our private parts for no reason other than the power that they held over us. So that would be very offensive to start compiling pornographic pictures of children because it's not for medical care. I think the community is going to have to decide what the way forward should be. I wanted to highlight for you some of the areas of concern in the legislation, some of the possible areas where overreaching could occur. And I will close at this point, and we'll have Senator Abeler, and then we'll have questions. Thank you.
So seriously, I watched you say whoa when she talked about the bill of imagine getting all young girls' private parts on the files. But this bill, even though it's not that crazy, but that's where it's going. And why Somalis? Why profile a community? We're visibly one of the largest Muslim community here. Yes, we have gone through female genital cutting, but that's not who. That's what we want to do right now. We have opportunities to understand more both the health risk and what's going on. And it's hard to kill a 1,000-year-old culture, but most of us don't want to do it. But this bill practically was really attacking our community. And thank God that people like Senator Abeler, who has no clue what this is, except that when he read the bill, he knew this was bad for families. and helped us, say no to this bill and get something going. So with that, please welcome Senator Abler to say a few words, and then I know young women are dying to ask questions. Please welcome Senator Abler.
Well, thank you for having me. I've been in office 18 years, and I can assure you when I first ran, I had no idea I'd be working on this topic. It was totally foreign to my experience and what I grew up knowing about. And the more I learned about it, the sadder I became. And I mean, the experience that whoever has gone through this had, I just grieve for them about that. And it just makes me compelled that why would we do that? And so one of the things I really it's important for me is respect, and respecting everybody. And I mean, it seems like that's a word that is too small a word to go toward this cutting. But at the heart of it, it's just it's a respect issue. And so who is somebody to say that they have to do that, to deprive them of their total natural state? It seems incomprehensible to me. And then the cure for this incomprehensible procedure would divide families even more. And so the harm that the authors of the Fix bill would try to stop, would only compound. And all the strides that have been made in the Somali community about women actually seeking health care and bringing their kids in to be given good consideration and avail themselves of what we have would be lost. That people would never go near a clinic. And the idea of taking pictures, I don't know if we had I don't know if any of you do childcare, we've been discussing fingerprinting. And just so you know, the discussion is that the fingerprinting girls and boys 13 to 17 who happen to live in a home where there's childcare going on. And so I find that to be problematic. And give me the fingerprinting. I mean, you would all want that instead. But if we think fingerprinting is an invasion of privacy, I can't imagine what on earth someone who's trying to help a problem thinks that these photos that just make me blush to think about what they're going on would do. And what, there's a group called Text for Life, and it's an anti-suicide thing. And so the idea is that a young person who's feeling suicidal might send a text for help. Talking to the people that do this service, the most common age is a 14-year-old young lady. And I cannot, and so in the fingerprinting would, I'm a criminal. But this other thing, anyway, it's time for this cutting to go away. And it's time for the people that are trying to fix it to stop fixing it that way. And so when the bill came up last year, as I looked at it and a few people reacted, I didn't know what the answer was, but I knew the answer wasn't that. And the judge gave a very thorough rendition about why that would be a very poor solution. And so I came tonight to listen to you all and to learn about how to do a better way and to do my best to respect everybody. And it's hard enough to come to a country that you didn't choose to come to. Many of you are happy to be here. Some would rather be back in Somalia or back in Ethiopia or somewhere. But here you are. I can't imagine having to go somewhere and learning a language. I can't imagine going to Somalia and trying to figure out what you're saying. I would learn the word for tea, and I would learn the word for baklava, and I would have a lot of tea and baklava for a long time. What would you like? Yeah, tea and baklava. Okay. They have other food. I can't say that. I don't know how do you say eggs. But so I'm really happy you're here, and I'm happy to be part of helping make it as good as it can be. Because here you are, and this is now your country. And how do we make this country as welcoming as it can be to include everybody? And not just Somalis. This is a meeting about this topic tonight, but it's about all the people who come and anybody whose culture says that they might be at risk of getting cut. And it's time to move on. And so I'm here to be part of that solution and to learn from you, and then with the help of Issaroon and the judge and all of you, come up with a remedy or no remedy that will do us some good. So anyway, thank you for that.
My name is Zainab and I go to St. Catherine University. And my question is, how we can find a way where there is no bounty on parents, because sometimes parents take this decision back home and not here, and this is going to affect them like in future. And also if we talk about like culture change in Saudi Arabia, like women sleeping with a man is like also like a big deal. If people that are not Saudian and travel there and had to follow the law, there is going to be difficulties. So how we can compare both of it and find solution for people that are here?
The first Muslim woman elected to parliament in Kenya, Sophia Abdi Nur, was able, when she was the nominated member of parliament, to get a female cutting bill passed in Kenya for everyone, because in Kenya there are so many different groups that practice this practice. And so she was able to get the law passed so that the practice would be delayed. If a child wanted it or a parent wanted it, they would not be able to do it until age 18, where the child would be able to give informed consent and have a say in what happened. And what Sophia talked about was her experience at age 5 and the loss of her friend who bled to death during the procedure. And so Sophia was criticized by publicly talking about her experience on the floor of the Kenya Parliament. But the legislators supported this change and the law was passed. And so it does take courage to stand up against people who don't want to even have a discussion about anything below the waistline for men or women. So, you know, you've got colorectal cancer, you've got prostate cancer, you've got all these things going on, but you have a taboo that you can't talk about anything below the waistline. So we're going to have to, for our own survival, be able to help our brothers and sisters and cousins and friends be able to have this kind of discussion to save their lives. And education is so important when people understand that it's not a mandated practice under any faith. It helps people understand that it's more social pressure. And to be able to, as Veronica said, have Thanksgiving without the cutting. So being able to have the celebratory rite of passage, but not the injuries.
I want to thank the judge for inviting me here. And my name is Veronica Rono, and I work with the judge a lot. And what I'd like to say is, as you say, this is geared to one community, but this is happening in all communities in the Kenyan community where I come from. They actually did it till just the other day, 2009, 10, they were still doing it. But it became, the fight started and people started talking about it. It's a hard conversation for somebody to talk about themselves in a way that you're describing something that you've gone through. It is a hard experience for some people that were forced into it. And I think I usually give an example of my cousin, because where I came from in the village, they only think you're a woman when you've gone through it. So, you know, my dad was educated, so he knew the bad effects of it. But so that didn't happen to us. But every time I went to the village, the other girls who are my age don't even listen to anything I say, because they say, oh, you're not a woman, no, you're not a woman. So I can't sit on the same table with them and have a conversation because, oh, you're not a woman. So went through that segregation to the point I hated going to to my, to see my grandma, because every time I walked in, my grandma would ask me, so you're here for the, for the celebration, you're here for the celebration. So it was like pressure. And that's what happens. It's peer pressure that happens to all the other girls in Kenya. And so I say it's something that happens in all communities. We just have to figure. So for my community, most people were saying, when you eliminate that, how will the girl learn how to be a woman? How will she? Because that's when they were going in there and they were learning how to be a wife and all that stuff. But what my mom did is she started a new different thing, that they still had the initiation right, minus the cut. So they still had, they went somewhere and they did a weekend thing where the girls just had a talk about sex, about, being a woman and just seeing what's right with you and how to even treat people around you. And that actually worked in my village. So people saw a different way of doing it, is that we don't have to go through this, but we can still there's good things from it. It's not like everything is evil from the whole. Which people don't understand is it's a process. It's not just one day, boom, you go to the hospital, get cut, boom, taken back home. No, it's a passage. And so just taking that rite of passage and taking what's good, beautiful about it, and just celebrating it and making it better. That way we have an alternative to it.
My question is similar, sort of kind of to what you said. I don't know, am I just being confused? Or what I'm wondering is, how do we not criminalize cultural practices? I know FGC is a horrible practice and there's awful outcomes that come out of it, but how do we, without having that imperial mindset, actually sort of criticize or change certain human rights violations? If we continue to criminalize things, then that just puts us back to Europe in the 1800s, right? Of when they saw cultures that were different from theirs, they were barbaric and uncivilized. So how do we go about actually educating people without making it seem as though we know what's proper and right for them? Because, it's not like I'm talking on a general mindset, but it's not our practice, right? There's a reason why people who do FGC, people who do other cultural practices do it, and we don't clearly understand it. That's why we criticize and we go ahead and criminalize it. So how do we go about changing that?
The experience in Kenya where the choice was delayed until age 18, where the girl was old enough to be of an age where she could weigh the physical challenges of the procedure versus age 5, where she would have no say and then be able to do that. So a lot of times if you have something, because we have things in the United States right now that a lot of people would call abhorrent. Without saying how old I am, we never saw people with tattoos. And now people have tattoos all over their bodies and they're permanent. But now that is a socially acceptable thing to have all these tattoos. There used to be regulations where you couldn't get a job if you had tattoos, but people decided that they wanted to have tattoos. Another thing that's happened is people piercing their tongues, their eyebrows, their noses. That just never would have happened. But people decided that they wanted to appear in public with all these different things sticking out of their noses and ears, and so they do. So there is a way where people of a certain adult age can decide that they want their bodies to be a certain way. But I think what we're talking about is let us not do it to the children, where the children don't understand and have very great difficulty growing up under the burdens of the altered condition.
And so in my comments, I suggested maybe there isn't a legislative fix, or maybe there is. And so if there is one, let's make one that actually is effective. But this sort of discussion, there's the group we have here and some people watching at home, and but talking about this and helping people understand what a bad idea it is, that's how you make things change. Public opinion does make a difference, and that's a good way to do it as well. Many things have changed over the years because people decided we didn't want to do that anymore. And so now we have tattoos. So now we have those instead, we can get rid of this, okay?
Could be brought back? If so, would it be brought back in the House first again, or in the Senate after?
So right now, the bill it's a 2-year cycle that we're in. And so actually nothing's ever dead until we adjourn. Just so you never should feel like you should be comfortable. And so what happened, the bill originated in the House. Is there a Senate companion?
Yeah, but it's stopped.
Yeah, so there was who's the author in the Senate?
Housley.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there's a bill in the House, a bill in the Senate. It passed the House and came to the Senate. And so now, wherever that bill is sitting in a committee somewhere and waiting for that committee to act upon it. And so the bill, Senator Housley, who is the author of that bill, is no fan of the way that bill is right now. So she was very concerned about the troubles and the bad things about the cutting, but is not a fan of that particular solution. So if a solution can be made legislatively, then that bill would be it would be put on. And then if that would pass the Senate, the House has a different version. The House could either accept the Senate's version or go to a conference committee. And that conference committee would be where the differences would be ironed out to something agreeable to both bodies. I can tell you if it's the House version, I'll never be agreeable to that. And I imagine I'll be a part of that conference. And so the bill is alive, but not very well. But your activity and people talking to their legislators would be very useful. Some of the people who voted yes in the House voted yes for the idea. They thought this is a very bad idea. They didn't know the content. They didn't understand the adverse effects. They didn't understand the chilling effect it would be on health care of any young lady who would be so suspected of this behavior, of this cutting that might happen, or the parents. And so many House members who voted yes were voting yes for a theme, but not understanding what they voted for. Or if they did understand what they voted for, they didn't know how bad it was. And so I would suggest that everybody here talk to everybody they know, to talk to their legislators, to make them have some legislative remorse about what they voted for if they're in the House and voted yes. And in the Senate, to make sure they understand that maybe no fix is better. And so I encourage you to remember that as legislators, we get elected and suddenly we know everything and we're perfect. Just to remind you, we don't know everything and we're not the least bit perfect. We're just people. And sometimes when groups do things, a group dynamic comes along. And so people who didn't know the content might have been drawn along by the group effect of the House. And they would be afraid to say, I didn't want to vote for that because I don't want to be for cutting. So if the vote is posed, if you're either against cutting and you vote for this, or otherwise you vote no, you must be for it. And help them be more subtle than that and realize that they can be against cutting and against this very, very bad remedy. And so your activity does matter. You telling your friends does matter, both on the legislative side, but more on the cultural side. And I'm nervous to step on how a culture comes into America. But over time, everything kind of melts and becomes more of this. We used to be called a melting pot. My ancestors came out of Ireland and Germany and England as long as ago as the 1700s, and some as recently as 19-something, the Irish ones. And over time, the customs that my family had have just become kind of blended into all the other things that America is. And one of those customs is not doing cutting. And so, but I don't want you to lose the uniqueness that you bring and that's going to be part of what you love about your former, country. But I want to remind you that things do change. I'm Norwegian also, and they had, my wife is Swedish in another part of European, and there used to be Swedish churches that only spoke Swedish because that's what they wanted to speak. After a while, the kids didn't know Swedish anymore, and they quit talking Swedish in church. And so things change, and I'm not sure if losing Swedish in church is a good or a bad thing, but it changed. And so by your activity and your intentionality and your talking to your friends and shining the light on this horrible practice, it can go away and be something we look back on with some chagrin. As the judge mentioned, slavery still goes on today in the trafficking and in some other very bad things. And nowadays, I can't imagine thinking that one person should own another. I can't imagine that. And in the same way, we can have this other, and that was tragic, and sorry about that. I didn't have anything to do with it, but it's just not right. And so as we grow in this understanding and teach people like me about it, who's like not connected at all, but now I understand it's like I'm just horrified. And so I'll do all I can, and the judge and the rest of you are going to do things, Isarun and others. So this is the beginning, not the end. This is a start to the process, a start to the solution. So help us think about what legislation might be, if there is something, but for sure, shine the light on this, and it'll go away.
You talked about social practices and how you're from, they spoke Swedish and Norwegian, all these different backgrounds. So why is it deemed barbaric and seen as inhumane if it's done in African countries, when you also mentioned that European countries also practice female genital cutting, used to practice female genital cutting? Is that because of societal views, social norms? Now that we acknowledge that it's wrong, I just also want people to consider that the women's mental health in this state, they have already, for the ones that have already gone through the cutting, the fact that they would have to take pictures of that and the trauma they would experience reliving it, that's a lot of things that's not like taken into, there's no black and white answer for this. So there's not one law that you can pass that will solve all of this. But also giving the women the platform to speak and letting them know that their privacy is respected, because there's trauma that comes with that. There's a lot of PTSD that also comes with the female genital cutting. So, yeah.
Good job. So, Senator Abler, if I recap, more legislators to be educated about the remorse. That's what, I like the fact that you're explaining why a lot of legislators had voted blindly for this bill and didn't even want to talk about it, because some people said, I don't want to talk about this. They don't even want to say cutting. Some legislators said, how is they're talking about the cutting? So it's, we're committed to do education. We'll be going to Representative Bly's district. So we're going to St. Olaf and colleges to talk about this issue. But also what we're going to be doing is we're partnering with a lot of healthcare providers. We're also having conversations with Minnesota Nurse Association. And our goal is to create more allies than enemies. And sometimes what we say in really, oh, Jesus, and some people cross their legs when they hear female genital cutting, and that reaction. And when someone who is your friend or your provider is reacting that way to you, I don't even know how other people will imagine, but I worked with healthcare providers, and I know, it doesn't faze me anymore because I got burned out so much. But the newer group, the younger women, and also we have opportunity here in Minnesota to be really a global leader in preventing FGC. But we just talk about FGC and the 150 to 200 young women and from everywhere and globally who have gone through female genital cutting. You have the biggest allies here. So open your eyes, open your ears, make sure that it's not about you, it's someone else. And if you think about someone else's need and wants and how they feel about their body parts, then you will be less judgmental. And empowering them, creating a cultural relevant services. The teenagers are going through their menstrual period, talking about their sexual health needs and their labor and delivery. Those things, you will be having an amazing opportunity for them globally in Minnesota to lead in not only holding accountable to our legislators, but also globally. Africa gets so much taxpayer money, and we can put time and accountability to those and say not only that we want to make women and girls priority, but really make it priority and attach to our dollars. And that is where Judge Lejeune is an international renowned person who's helping us. Also tonight we have Suhamu Ahmed, who is also coming from Somalia, and do you want to wave? She is from Virginia, but actually she went back home and now she leads a gender area in Somalia, and so she's here learning, meeting legislators, and empowering women and girls. So with that said, please stay in touch. We have your contact information if no one else has questions. I know you're all tired, and there's for sambusa and tea back there, so stay mingle. But we'll be doing more workshops, more conversations. If you have church or community circles that you want us to come to talk about this issue and humanize it. We don't want to be looked at down on us, and for sure our community is being under a lot of pressure, but we don't want this to be part of the reason that women and girls are not seeking the reproductive health we need. And I know a lot of providers care about us. We all talk about women and women's rights, but let's start that our rights are first respected. And by you being here tonight, you're braver than I am. So thank you so much. And on behalf of our team, Christine Dici, who's the rock of the Isron team, who's out there doing all the work. Oh, she's right there. Thank you so much. I do appreciate it. And then our media team, please stay around, and thank you so much for coming.